Nora clutched the strap of her battered suitcase as the train doors hissed open, and the crowd surged past her like she was a lamppost, invisible, inconvenient in the way. She found an empty seat near the middle of the carriage and settled in, pulling her worn brown coat tighter across her chest. The fabric had pilled at the elbows. There was a faint grease stain on the lapel from the sandwich she had eaten standing outside the interview building, too nervous to sit down, too hungry to wait. She had tried to scrub it off in the station bathroom. It hadn't worked. It never did. One by one, the seats around her filled. A man in a gray suit glanced her way, hesitated, and moved 3 rows forward. A woman with a rolling carry-on swept her eyes over Nora's coat, her cracked shoes, her too thin face, and quietly chose the aisle seat near the door. A teenager with earphones didn't even look. He just drifted past like he could sense something and didn't want to know what it was. The seat beside Nora stayed empty. She pressed her lips together and turned to the window. Outside, the platform buzzed with life. Families embraced. Coffee vendors shouted their offers. A group of students laughed loud enough to shake the glass. Nora watched all of it with the careful, practiced blankness of someone who had learned a long time ago that longing for something you couldn't have only made the aching worse. She was 28 years old and had not slept properly in 4 days. The job interview that morning had gone badly, not catastrophically, not in a way she could point to and say that was the moment it fell apart. It had simply gone the way things often went for her lately, politely, quietly, with the particular kind of disappointment that comes wrapped in professional smiles and the phrase, "We'll be in touch." She had $142 in her account. Her younger brother, Daniel, needed his asthma medication refilled before Friday. The rent on their shared one-room apartment was due in 9 days. Nora exhaled slowly through her nose. Keep it together, she told herself. Just get home. The train shuddered, preparing to move, and then the carriage doors opened one final time. A man stepped in. He was tall not in a showy way, but in the way that made a room quietly rearrange itself around him. He wore a dark coat, no tie, a watch that caught the light with a restraint that somehow made it more expensive looking, not less. He moved through the carriage without looking left or right, the way people do when they are very used to being looked at. Nora didn't recognize him at first, but the woman 3 seats behind her did. "Oh my God," she whispered to her companion. Is that Marcus Webb?" The name passed through the carriage like electricity. Marcus Webb, 34 years old, chief executive of the Webb Foundation and majority owner of Crestline Industries, named by 3 separate publications as one of the most influential private philanthropists in the country. He had turned down a government cabinet appointment twice. He gave no interviews. He was, by all accounts, a man who did exactly what he wanted and nothing else. And he was walking directly toward the empty seat beside Nora. She assumed he would stop before he reached her, that he would spot a better option, a cleaner option, and veer away. It was what everyone did. She had stopped expecting otherwise. He didn't stop. He reached her row, looked at the seat, looked at her once with calm, dark eyes, and sat down. Nora stiffened. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, instinctively. "If you're looking for more space, the seats near the front are." "I'm fine here," he said. His voice was quiet, not unkind. She blinked. "Okay." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small notebook, and began to write something. She stared at the window again. The platform slid away. The train moved. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, without looking up from his notebook, he said, "The interview, did it go the way you wanted it to?" Nora turned her head slowly. "Excuse me." "You've been exhaling every 4 minutes since I sat down," he said, still writing. "The kind of exhale that means someone's been holding their breath all day." She stared at him. He looked up then, and there was something in his face, not pity, nothing so simple as that. Curiosity, maybe, the genuine kind. "It didn't," she said after a pause. "What was the role?" program coordinator for a literacy NGO. She looked away. It doesn't matter. It clearly does. She didn't answer right away. The train curved through the city's outskirts, and the gray buildings gave way to the flat, pale expanse of the countryside. She thought about lying. She thought about saying I'm fine the way she always said I'm fine, the way that had become so automatic it barely counted as language anymore. Instead, she said, I've applied to 41 positions in 7 months. That was the 14th interview. I gave up my scholarship at 19 to care for my mother. She passed 4 years ago. I've been raising my brother since. She swallowed. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because you asked, and I'm too tired today to pretend. Marcus Webb set down his pen. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, What's your name? Nora Adeyemi. Marcus. She almost laughed. I know who you are. Most people do. He said it without vanity, which is usually why they don't talk to me like that. If you're finding Nora's story gripping, tap subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this is only just beginning. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Marcus had seen her before he ever boarded the train. He had been standing near the far end of the station concourse, waiting for a call to finish, when he noticed the old woman. She must have been in her 70s, moving slowly with a cane, and when her handbag slipped from her shoulder and hit the ground, the contents scattered coins, a small purse, a folded photograph, a set of keys across the busy floor. A dozen people walked past, some glanced down. One man almost stepped on the photograph. Nobody stopped. Except one woman in a brown coat. She crouched immediately, collected everything without being asked, took her time to check nothing was missing, and then gently handed the bag back. The old woman said something. The young woman in the brown coat shook her head, declining thanks, it seemed, and walked on toward the platform. Marcus had ended the call. He had boarded the same train. He had sat beside her. Now, watching her look out the window with that controlled, careful expression, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not attraction, not yet. Something quieter, the specific, rare feeling of recognizing a person who is genuinely good in a world that rewards performance over character. Tell me about the program coordinator role, he said. What would you have done in it? She glanced at him, uncertain. Humor me, he said. And so she did. She talked about curriculum design, about community outreach, about the gap between what NGOs promised on paper and what they actually delivered at the grassroots level. She talked about the children in her brother's school who couldn't read past a primary 2 level because nobody had bothered to diagnose the problem, let alone fix it. She talked with her hands. She forgot, for 20 minutes, to be exhausted. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, The Webb Foundation is expanding its education access program in 3 underserved regions next quarter. We don't have a coordinator for community partnerships yet. Nora went very still. I'm not offering you charity, he said immediately, reading her face. I'm telling you there is a position, a real one with a salary range and a reporting structure and deliverables. You would have to apply and interview properly. He paused. But I'm telling you because I think you'd be the best person for it. She turned to face him fully. You don't know me. I know you stopped for a woman nobody else stopped for, he said. In my experience, that tells you almost everything. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Outside, the countryside was golden in the afternoon light. The train hummed steadily beneath them. I'll think about it, she finally said. He nodded and picked up his notebook again. That's all I'm asking. Before we continue, if this story is moving you, leave a comment below. Tell us, would you have stopped for that woman? Let's see what our community says. She applied. She got the position. And over the months that followed, Nora Adeyemi stepped into a version of her life she had quietly stopped believing was possible. She coordinated partnerships with schools in 3 regions. She designed intake assessments that identified children slipping through the gaps. She trained volunteers. She wrote reports that actually got read. She was, everyone around her agreed, exceptional at the work. And she and Marcus talked, not always about work, sometimes about books, sometimes about nothing in particular. He was not what she had expected, not cold, not remote. He was precise, and he was private, and he had a dry sense of humor he deployed so sparingly that when it appeared, it caught her completely off guard, and she would laugh before she could stop herself. She told herself it was professional. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself a lot of things. Then the media found out. The headlines were predictable. Webb Foundation hire or Webb's new interest. One publication ran a photograph of them walking out of a community school together with a caption that made Nora's stomach turn. Her colleagues were careful around her in a new, uncomfortable way. Marcus's family, his mother, an imperious woman named Cecile, and his two older brothers made their displeasure known through the channels wealthy families use, which is to say through silence, through canceled dinners, through pointed questions about Nora's background slipped into conversations she was never meant to hear but somehow always did. She nearly left. She typed the resignation letter on a Tuesday night, sitting on her kitchen floor with Daniel asleep in the next room, and she read it back 3 times. Then she deleted it. Not because she wasn't exhausted, not because it didn't hurt, but because she had spent too many years shrinking herself for rooms that didn't deserve her, and she was not willing to do it again. When she walked into Marcus's office the next morning, he took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing I can't handle," she said. "Nora." "I'm not leaving," she said. "In case that's what you're worried about, I'm not leaving." Something shifted in his expression. He stood up from behind the desk. "I wasn't worried about the foundation," he said quietly. She met his eyes. "I know," she said. The gala was held on a Thursday evening in late November, inside a cavernous hall strung with warm light. Marcus had organized it as an annual celebration of community impact. Teachers, health workers, volunteers, the kind of people whose names never appeared on donor plaques. Nora sat near the front, thinking she was there as staff. She was not there as staff. When Marcus took the podium, he spoke about the foundation's work, about the meaning of service, about what it truly meant to choose others when choosing yourself would have been easier. And then he told a story about a train station and an old woman and a young woman in a brown coat who hadn't even looked around to see if anyone was watching before she stopped to help. The hall was completely silent. "I sat beside her that day," he said, "because I wanted to know who she was. I have spent every day since then being grateful that I did." He stepped away from the podium. He walked to where Nora was sitting. He knelt. "I'm not doing this because of the headlines or what my family thinks or what anyone in this room expects," he said. "I'm doing this because the day I watched you stop for a stranger, I understood something I hadn't understood before. That goodness like yours doesn't wait for an audience. It just acts." He opened the box. "Nora Adeyemi," he said, "will you let me spend the rest of my life sitting beside you?" The hall erupted. And Nora, who had been turned away, overlooked, passed by, and underestimated for longer than she cared to count, looked at the man kneeling before her and said, softly and without hesitation, "Yes." If this story stayed with you, please like this video, leave a comment telling us your favorite moment, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. The next one is already waiting for you.